You know, when you see one of those beautiful old pianos and you look at those keys, have you ever really thought about what they're made of? Well, for a long, long time, that gorgeous material held a pretty dark secret. So today, let's get into the real story of ivory, elephants, and a myth that a lot of us believe. Just let that sink in for a minute. For basically every single high-end piano made before the 1980s, a magnificent elephant was killed just for its tusks. That beautiful music we all love, well, it came at a terrible price. I'm sure you've heard this story before. It's the classic technology to the rescue tale, right? We invented plastic, it was a perfect substitute for ivory, and poof, the poaching problem was solved. It's a really nice, clean story, but we're about to find out if it's actually true. Okay, so to really get this, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to understand why ivory was such a huge deal in the first place. I mean, what made it so special? See, ivory wasn't just pretty to look at, it was a seriously high-performance material. Its structure is kind of like our teeth, and it's porous. That means it actually absorbs a tiny bit of sweat from a pianist's fingers so they don't slip during a performance. It was the absolute gold standard for anything luxury, a status symbol that everyone, from musicians to royalty, just had to have. So along comes this first plastic alternative, celluloid, and everyone thought it was the future. But for the people who actually used it, the top-tier musicians and players, it just wasn't the same. It felt slippery, it looked, well, cheap, and, as we're about to see, it had some, let's just say, explosive little problems. And the push to replace ivory was very, very real. Billiards were all the rage, but get this, you could only get about 4 to 8 billiard balls from a single elephant tusk. That's it. So this huge prize was offered, which led an inventor named John Wesley Hyatt to create celluloid. On paper, it looked like the perfect fix. Yeah, you read that right. This slide pretty much perfectly captures one of celluloid's biggest and, honestly, kind of hilarious flaws. This wasn't just a poor substitute. It was a genuinely dangerous one. So it turns out this new miracle plastic was made from something that's basically a chemical cousin to gunpowder. So just picture it. You're in some quiet, fancy saloon, you line up your shot, you hit the balls, and bang! A small explosion goes off right on the table. It's not exactly a surprise that serious players said, you know what, I'll stick with the real non-exploding ivory. Thanks. And this is the part of the story where that simple myth we all know just completely falls apart. If a plastic substitute existed, even a flawed, explodey one, why did the killing of elephants actually get worse? This is the absolute heart of the issue. The invention of plastic should have been the beginning of the end for the ivory trade. But instead, it happened at the same time as some of the absolute worst years for Africa's elephants. How does that make any sense? Well, the simple truth is, you can't just invent something in a lab and expect it to magically erase centuries of culture, economics, and human ego. Real ivory was still seen as the real deal, the authentic, superior material. The money to be made from the colonial ivory trade was massive, and the cultural traditions of ivory carving, especially in Asia, meant the demand didn't just stay the same, it actually went up. Just try to wrap your head around this number. At the start of the 1800s, the African continent was home to an estimated 20 million elephants, an absolutely mind-boggling number of animals. But then you fast forward to 1989. Now, remember, that's more than 120 years after plastic was invented, and the population had collapsed to just 600,000. That's a 97% drop. It's just catastrophic. And look at this. I mean, this chart says it all. You don't need a PhD to see what's happening. As the production of plastic just skyrockets from the 1950s onward, the elephant population goes into a complete nosedive. You couldn't ask for clearer proof that just inventing an alternative didn't come close to solving the problem. So, if a tech fix wasn't the silver bullet everyone thought it was, what was? What finally started to turn things around for the elephants? The real game changer wasn't some new invention in a lab. It was a decision made in a conference room. In 1989, an international treaty called CITES put a nearly total ban on the ivory trade. That was the first thing that had a real measurable effect. And look at that time gap, a full 120 years between the invention and the intervention that actually worked. And it wasn't just some signature on a piece of paper. It took these huge, powerful symbolic acts, like Kenya burning its entire stockpile of confiscated ivory to really drive the message home to the world. They were trying to destroy its value, to turn this symbol of luxury into a symbol of destruction and shame. So in the end, saving the elephants wasn't simple. It took a whole bunch of things working together. It took that international law, it took incredibly brave rangers on the ground fighting poachers, it took new economic ideas like ecotourism to make a living elephant worth more than a dead one, and it took a massive global effort to change how people thought about ivory. So what does this whole story really teach us? What's the lesson we can pull from all this tragic mess of technology, nature, and human behavior? Well, it teaches us that technology is almost never the whole answer. It's just step one. It gives us a new option, a better choice. But actually getting all of us as a society to make that better choice, that takes laws, it takes changing how we think, and it takes a whole lot of hard, sustained work. Ultimately, the story of the ivory keys asks us to look past the beautiful object and see where it came from. To remember that behind a lot of the things we desire, there can be a devastating cost. And to maybe, just maybe, recognize that a living, breathing animal is infinitely more valuable than a lifeless product. And really, that's the question this whole story leaves us with today. Think about it. From fossil fuels to fast fashion, we have countless modern ivory problems where we have better alternatives. The real challenge, just like it was back then, isn't coming up with the invention. It's having the courage to make the choice.